So, what exactly do you mean when you say, what do you mean?
I do not understand this. This really confuses me.
What's that supposed to mean?
What's that supposed to mean?
What's that supposed to mean?
I don't know what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
What's that supposed to mean?
Cultural anthropologist Ujwal Arkalgud and MotivBase president Jason Partridge will tell you that perception and meaning are the primary pressure points that shape and create the world we live in.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word.
Let's explore why meaning matters.
I do not think it means what you think it means.
Now, here's your host, Erin Trafford.
Well, hello. First of all, so great to see all of the responses that we're getting coming into the show. And, I knew we were going to make waves with everything that we've been talking about, but, changing hearts, changing minds, all of those things. But I'm really thrilled with everything that's going on with the show so far. And I want to pull some of those threads that we started to weave in the first few episodes and open up a conversation. Guys, I think you'll agree with me, totally ripe to be had right now. So let's go back to the episode we just did, episode 3. And we were talking about the meanings we associate with gender. And we kind of, dangled a carrot and then ended the episode. And I want to pick that back up today because I want to talk about how that is those meanings around gender specifically are changing, they're adapting, and why we can't, really talk about gender without talking about things like feminism, femininity, and masculinity. And to be honest, I think this is going to be the next few episodes because there's so much here. But let's start with a bit of a scene setter because I don't want to debate the merits or the tenets of feminism from a political standpoint. That's really not what we're here to do. But what I want to talk about is why it matters from a meaning perspective. And so for organizations, corporations, companies, here's a question that I'm going to ask to you guys. Why are these topics of gender, femininity, masculinity, why do organizations need to care about them?
Yeah, fantastic question, because thankfully, especially in the last couple of years, we get a lot of these questions from a lot of our clients as well. And I think it's very important because there are a lot of very specific tangible outcomes to be had here. For example, product lines. So if you're manufacturing products, you need to care about the future of gender, the future of womanhood, the future of feminism, whatever it is. You need future of masculinity. All of that matters, whether it's whether you're creating children's products or creating apparel or clothing, it doesn't matter. There's so many direct, tangible benefits and impacts to be had. The second, of course, is just marketing and advertising overall. I think, Erin, we've come to a point where, and I'm sure we'll unpack this in a later episode too, we've come to a point where I think, especially a lot of our marketing colleagues talk to us about how they operate from a position of fear, right? It's more about not saying the wrong thing rather than learning to say the right thing again. And that's because we're not asking about meaning. And I think meaning plays a huge role in making us feel empowered to say the right thing as opposed to constantly, walking a tightrope, so to speak.
So that's interesting when you say learning to say the right thing again, which makes me want to say, were we ever saying the right thing?
Yeah, good point. I think we probably weren't, but I think the point is that culture and meaning evolved and has evolved to a point where it's making a lot of people feel left behind. And I think that's not good for humanity in general, right? We don't want people to feel left behind because of their professions. There's so much, for example, discourse on how, comedy is dying because everybody takes offense to every joke being made. But the reality is comedy isn't dying. It's just that meanings have evolved to a certain point where there's a little bit of a retraining that needs to happen, right? And the retraining isn't don't say any of these things. The retraining is learn about what these things mean so we can say the right things and still have dialogue.
I think that's really interesting, Ujwal, because I mean, even if you think about how different people have reacted to the challenge that is being faced in regards to this reset that's taking place. And I don't know if you guys saw when Cat Williams, the comedian, came out and, very kind of over the top, kind of in some ways kind of considered controversial comic. And he very much came out and said, it's my responsibility and it's the comedian's responsibility to make a connection with the audience. And if what I used to do is no longer making a connection, I can't get upset about what I'm saying that's upsetting people. I need to better understand why I need to think about what I'm saying. And Brilliant. I thought it was such a really, really important kind of thing that was, it hit really close to home, because a lot of what we're doing is we get so focused on the what that we don't take the time to take a step back and start to question the why behind the what. And this is a perfect example of a topic that requires that.
I think it's brilliant that we're talking about comedians, because I've always had this belief about comedians that they are underestimated as genius marketers, for the sole reason that I think to be truly, truly funny at stand-up comedy, without being crass or gross or, that kind of thing, you have to be extremely observant and articulate about what your audience actually thinks and feels. Like, they're brilliant at picking up on that kind of undercurrent that's there. And we've been talking a lot about myth, right? I feel like comedians kind of inherently understand how myths become truth.
Absolutely. And there's a great quote that I'm going to paraphrase from Ricky Gervais, where he says, there isn't anything that can't be joked about. It depends what the joke is. And it's brilliant, right? And he explains that in the context of saying why he works so hard to think about a joke. Because it's not just about making fun of somebody. It's about unearthing something about culture that makes us think. At least that's his brand of humor. And whether you agree with that or not, I think it's an important point to be made.
For sure. So how do we tie this back into our conversation about gender and the meaning and the changing meaning of that? I mean, just before we hit record on this, we were talking about growing our respective teams and team building and culture. So how does this awareness trickle down to that very ground level experience of, running a company, hiring a team, being an organization with leadership? Jason, what do you think?
I think that there's an evolving expectation in regards to understanding, again, I go back to my love of cliches, right? Walk a mile in someone's shoes. And I think that is something that is increasingly being thought about, especially as we work with, Fortune 1000 companies, where, I mean, obviously day to day, they're trying to walk a mile in their consumer shoes. But what we're really seeing is that we're seeing that even internally, these organizations are really starting to come to a place where they're trying to rethink about the role of gender in the organization. They're starting to think about what's happening at a senior leadership level. How are there preconceived notions that have led to a structure? And are they considering kind of how that may be a disadvantage? Have they prevented a different type of thinking, a different type of approach to evolve within an organization that could have given it a competitive advantage? These are the types of things that get very much tied to understanding the role that gender can play, not just in how you're communicating with, your consumer, but how it's really kind of shaping how you operate as a structure.
Right. And I think that ties right back into coming back to knowing what the right thing to say is. Because when you talk about that, I was reminded of something I learned in a women in business group that I'm in, that there are more CEOs at the Fortune 500 level named John than there are women entirely, right? And so then the question is it just a matter of shifting the structure so you hire more women or you hire more people of color, or you what is it that needs to be said internally to at least show awareness of the changing meaning?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to put it through the lens of these large organizations. If you're a leader in one of these organizations and you're listening, we get some of the challenges you have, right? The stress of not effing it up. Because ultimately everything is about money, and I'm not being cynical. I'm just being a realist. Ultimately, everything is about money. So for us, when we're studying the future of gender, part of it is to help organizations figure out how they can make more money by being smarter about where culture is headed. Because guess what? That's how the world moves, right? So a great example of this is, if, let's say, and this is true, we're seeing how the meanings around gender are evolving. There's greater acknowledgement of the fact that gender isn't a binary thing. It's not a 1 and a 0, that we could lie on a spectrum of gender. We need to create openness in how we are able to express who we are as people. So all of that is great. But of course, from an organization's perspective, that's a very complex topic to make money off of, right? But then you can distill it down to say, okay, so what is the area where there's an opportunity? Turns out there is an opportunity because there is now a whole generation of parents with young children that are going, how do I not make the mistakes my parents made? Right? How do I adapt, not just to be a better parent, but also to prepare my child for the world they are walking into, right? So suddenly there's an opportunity, for example, just very simple, to remove or squash stereotypes that harm everybody. So let's just take let's take the binary example. Little boys and girls. How do you begin by just squashing stereotypes? Oh, boys are supposed to play football or hockey or what have you. Girls are supposed to play soccer or go to ballet. Let's start there, right? And I'm using this to just illustrate that even big, hairy topics like gender and the future of gender have very tangible outcomes that can affect organizations when the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
So essentially what we're saying is developing some awareness. Again, we're coming back to that kind of duality of why meaning matters, is because these issues are things that matter at very much so at the individual family unit level, but they also matter at this cultural and leadership level, and that the companies that are aware of those two things happening in concert are the ones that are kind of, can I say, like, they're winning the conversation, they're owning the narrative right now?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, without naming names, there are companies in the States, for example, that have proudly made room for gender-neutral bathrooms. Such a small thing. This is not just about marketing, by the way. Going back to your earlier point, Erin, this also helps their own employees. It makes somebody who's applying for a job go, you know what? The fact that I have a gender-neutral bathroom in my office is something that's going to help me in, feeling comfortable, feeling accepted, feeling like I can be myself. Think about how significant of an impact that is on your brand. It will trickle down eventually to impacting how people think about you, but it's the little things that make a difference.
I think that it also is indicative of there are certain companies that are trying to future-proof their business in order to be prepared for the shift and the change that people are currently undergoing that we may not fully understand yet. And I think that that is the big thing that is taking place with gender right now, is that the companies that are trying to understand the shift, that are deconstructing what is happening, are going to be the ones that are going to better serve their consumers in the future because they're asking the question why at the right time.
I love that you brought that up, Jason, because that incepts exactly what I want to talk about in the next show. Because when we look at this through the lens of the pandemic and what has happened, and we know that millions of, in particular, women are now out there looking for new work, they're going to be entering the workforce in a new way. This brings up an opportunity and a conversation around how do we talk about women in the workplace now. So I feel like that's a whole other show that we need to put a pin in this one and come back next week to talk about that one. So that's it for this show. If you want to comment, if you want to drop an idea for what you would like us to talk about here on Why Meaning Matters, please send us an email to hello@storystudionetwork.com. And if you're enjoying the show, share with your network. Don't forget to hit subscribe and like, and leave us a comment so that we can give you a shout out on the next show. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Why Meaning Matters with Ujwal Arkalgud, Jason Partridge, and your host, Erin Trafford.
Inconceivable! You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Why Meaning Matters is produced for MotivBase and the Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions.